Hello, brilliant entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 343, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/343. In today's episode, I'm covering 6 major launch mistakes. Now, I don't want to make it all doom and gloom. We're going to be focused on how to overcome those mistakes, what to do instead. It's all going to be very positive, but I think it's important that we touch on these things because some of them are advice that I see other launch mentors giving out of things to do, and I would recommend that you don't. So I'm going to explain why and what to do instead. Let's dive in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart Centered Business Podcast. When it comes to launching an online course, membership, or program, there's a lot of conflicting advice out there about where you need to be focusing your energy and attention, what strategies work best these days, and all the other moving parts. And that can mean sometimes we get a lot of conflicting information and advice on what to do. But also, with all of those different opinions, it can be easy for us to get caught up in focusing our energy and attention on things that aren't necessarily right for the stage of launching that you're at, or the size of audience that you have, or even just for the model of business that you're moving into. A lot of the information that we get online, a lot of blogs, a lot of podcast episodes, a lot of articles and webinars are very generic advice, and it's not necessarily suited to a heart-centered, consent-driven business or a high-ticket product business, or all of the different nuances that make our businesses unique and our marketing strategies unique aren't all covered by one generic webinar that teaches the perfect launch strategy, because there is no one perfect launch strategy. So what I thought I would do is just look at 6 of the most common launch mistakes that I see in our community, understanding where they come from, and that it can be very easy for us to fall into those traps, but then also what to do instead and how to address some of those mistakes. So the first one is that for your launch, you're completely focused on reach and hoping that that reach will result in conversion. And this often comes because 90% of the business growth advice and marketing advice and strategy advice out there is focused on getting you reach, getting you in front of a larger audience. But getting in front of a larger audience doesn't necessarily improve your launch results by the same factor, right? If you 3x your audience size, you don't necessarily 3x your launch results. And reach is only one part of the client attraction process. So if you've listened to a bunch of podcasts from me before, you've probably heard me talk about the client attraction process before. If not, I'll put a link in the show notes to my most recent podcast about the client attraction process, because it's got a lot more depth in it. But in a nutshell, the client attraction process maps out the different stages that people go through before they buy from us. So first is reach. We need to get in front of as many of the right people as possible. Next is nurture. We need to build a relationship with each of those audience members. So we want to nurture that relationship. We can do that at scale through things like free content and resources and email marketing and those sorts of things. But we can also do that very effectively on a one-to-one basis as well, having conversations, being of service, answering people's questions, all of those sorts of things. So nurture is the second stage of the client attraction process. Third is lead generation. And this is probably the most forgotten part of the client attraction process. And that is where you invite people to lean closer to investing, and they do so. So not you invite people to sign up to a freebie that's unrelated and they do so. Not that you bribe people onto your mailing list with some kind of random checklist and they do so. That's not lead generation, that's list growth. And that doesn't necessarily equal lead generation. Lead generation is a specific step towards buying something. So that might be booking a sales conversation, sending you a DM to say, hey, I'm interested in this program, or what's the payment plan for that package you've been talking about? Or you inviting people to connect with you to discuss how you might be able to work together. or getting people on a launch webinar where you're specifically, qualifying people as to whether they would be a good fit for the program, and then presenting the program, and they stick around and hear about the program because they want to, because they're interested. Just a little quick aside here, I see so many people trying to bribe people to stay to the end of the webinar so that they can hear the sales pitch, trying to trick people into hearing a sales pitch, or stick around to hear this so that you have to listen to my sales pitch. And it just, to me, like, it comes from a space of fear, but also, like, why do you want to force people to hear a sales pitch if they're not interested in buying from you, or if they don't think it's the right fit for them right now? Like, my approach is to be upfront and say, okay, now I'm going to tell you how I could help you with this through my program. If you don't need to hear about this, you're welcome to leave. Like, if you want to hear about it, stick around. Just that one little out tells me who the people who stay in the room are the ones who really want to hear this. That's good. Why would I want to bribe the other people who left the minute I said, and now I'm going to talk about the program? Why would I want to somehow bribe them to sit and listen to my pitch when they don't want to hear it? Is it because I think I can trick them into buying it? Is it because I'm going to use psychological tactics and strategies to make them feel like a failure if they don't buy from me? I mean, that's what some people do, but that's not my choice, and that's not how I do it. So lead generation is inviting people to lean in to find out more about working together or how they could buy something from you, and they do it. And then the final step is conversion. So one of the mistakes that I see people make when they're launching is that they're focused so much on reach that they don't have a balanced client attraction process. And actually, reach is the most expensive and time-intensive part of the client attraction process. And the more people you lose at each stage, the more expensive your cost per sale becomes, and the lower your profit margin. So rather than have everything focused on reach, what I would recommend is in your launch, ensure you've got a balanced client attraction process. You're spending a quarter of your time on reach, a quarter of your time on nurture, a quarter of your time on lead generation, and a quarter of your time on conversion. So that it's not just 90% just trying to reach. Make the pitch, did they buy? Because you're reducing the percentage of people who will buy from you by not understanding that it takes that process of building a relationship, getting people to lean in, and then presenting your offer. So mistake number one is all reach and no balance in the client attraction process. So the way to fix it, get that balance back in. Number two, launch built on theory. So there's a balancing act here, because sometimes the first time you launch, you're going to have to make some estimated guesses. But the more that we can get tangible evidence and information and insight into what our audience wants, what their drivers are for wanting to achieve this particular goal, what barriers are going to get in the way, what it is that they're actually looking for, what's important to them, what's not important to them, the more we have tangible insight into that and evidence of that, the more effective the launch is going to be. And it's one thing to say, okay, well, I know a lot about my niche and I know what they think is the solution to the problem, but I know that what they need is a bit deeper than that, and doing it that way because of what you already know, versus, well, I think people want to be happier, and I think that they would be interested in coming to a workshop on how to improve their happiness rating. And I think, and everything is just all coming out of theory. The more you can have proof of each of your launch elements and of the product that you're selling, the more effective your launch will be, the more confidence you will have in it, and also the more confidence you'll have in speaking to the promise of the thing that you're selling as well. There's far too many people out there trying to launch a program with no promise behind it. Now, I don't mean like, I guarantee you're going to make X amount of dollars, but like, what is a reasonable expectation of what I'm going to achieve as a result of doing this? Like, what would be a reasonable expectation? Not a guaranteed expectation, but Tell me what I'm actually going to get out of this. So many people don't even talk about that at all. All they talk about is the process. They don't talk about the outcome. They just say this module and this module and this module and this module and woo, and then they talk about like big picture kind of, oh, you'll feel more confident. Oh, you'll feel more at ease. Oh, you'll live in flow. What does that mean? I don't know. What am I actually going to get out of this? So rather than building it on theory, the antidote is to get as much proof as possible and limit the amount of theorizing that you need to do, because you've collected evidence of what people want and what they don't want and what their goals are and what gets in the way and why they would be driven to purchase something that would help them solve that problem. So no more launches built on theory. Let's actually collect some evidence. Number 3 is overpricing the offer compared to the value proposition. Now, this might sound a little different to advice that you've heard before. I think every business mentor I've ever worked with, every launch strategist I've ever listened to, every webinar I've ever been to, they always say, put the price up, put the price up, put the price up, put the price up. Premium, 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 premium. Now, I am a big fan of being a premium in the market, consistently increasing your prices, all of those things. But you need to ensure that the value proposition of what people are getting out of this is relative to the price point. So if you haven't heard my definition of value proposition before, value proposition is the value of the gap between before doing your program and after through the eyes of the buyer. So you might feel that it's very valuable for people to get a better night's sleep. But if your audience thinks, oh, that would be nice, but it's not important to me, they are going to attach a very different value to that transformation than the value you attach. So the answer to overpricing for the value proposition is not necessarily to reduce the price. The first step is to, number 1, have a strong value proposition, map it out, be very adept at articulating that value proposition. The second thing is to look for opportunities to improve the value proposition by getting more niched, getting more tangible, being more clear and concise about that journey. There's lots of ways that we can improve the value proposition. And then the third thing is to, if the price still outweighs the value proposition, we may need to bring the price down a little. So, when it comes to making a decision about whether people are going to buy from you or not, there needs to be 2 things. Number 1, they need to have the capacity to buy at that price point. So for some people, they're eliminated because they don't have that cash. They're not willing to do a payment plan. They have the cash, but they're not willing to prioritize investing in this. You won't change their mind or change their financial situation or change someone's priorities. If someone prioritizes their children over their work, you can't change that. You just can't. You can connect what you do to their number 1 priority, but you cannot change someone's number 1 priority. We are who we are. We prioritize what we prioritize. Yes, we might say we want to prioritize our health and well-being more, but if we're someone who defaults to prioritizing our business over our health, guess what? When things get hard, we prioritize our business over our health. You can't change that. So rather than trying to change people's priorities, rather than trying to force people to see the value, instead, we just need to acknowledge that some people will value that transformation more than others. We can focus your messaging on speaking to those who do value that transformation. And also, the second factor is, do I perceive the value I'm going to get is higher than the price I have to pay? That's it. I have to have the capacity to pay and the desire to pay to spend that amount of money. And I need to perceive that the value I'm going to get is higher than the price I'll have to pay for it. So when it comes to purchasing a course on Facebook ads, for example, if that course is $1,000 do I perceive the value I'm going to get from doing that course and implementing the strategies is more than $1,000 for me in the short term? Do I expect a short-term return on investment of $1,000 or more? If yes, I'm likely to buy. If no, I'm unlikely to buy. And it doesn't have to be necessarily in a dollar value in terms of their perception of the value proposition, but it does come into consideration. So if I have the choice between spending money on something that will bring in income and spending money on something that will feel good but not bring in income, chances are I'll be more focused on bringing in the income if I am someone whose top priority is income. If I'm someone whose top priority is pleasure and enjoying myself, I might perceive the value of something in that space as being higher for me. So I'd be more likely to buy that thing. So you can see it comes down to the individual, their priorities, and their perception of that value proposition. But you as the seller need to ensure that your price is appropriate to the value proposition as perceived by your niche. So that is mistake number 3, is overpricing for the value proposition through the eyes of your clients. And the antidote is clarify the value proposition and learn how to articulate it well, improve the value proposition, and then reduce the price if necessary. So I'm not someone who's like, no, your price is too high, your price is too high. I'm also on board with let's be a premium in the market. But if it's not converting because the VP is not there and there's nothing else you can do to improve that value proposition beyond, completely retooling and completely overhauling what it is that you're offering, then sometimes the best strategy is actually to price appropriately, to bring the price point down. Sometimes the perception of the value proposition is impacted by your expertise, your experience, your time in the market, your branding. There are other things that can increase the perceived value. It doesn't just come down to what's inside the course, but a lot of those things cost money. A lot of those things take time that you don't have. So if you are, for example, teaching tarot card readings and you've been teaching it for 6 months and someone else is teaching tarot card readings and they're the best known in the industry, they've been doing it for 25 years, most of their clients end up becoming very in-demand tarot readers, then the perceived value of working with you is going to be less than the perceived value of working with that other person in most cases. Now, there are ways to increase the perceived value of working with you. So if I was in that situation, I would be highlighting the fact that someone who's been in the industry for 25 years and has 600 students at a time isn't necessarily going to get to know you on a personal basis. So that high touch, high connection part of working with me increases the perceived value of my offer compared to that offer. But you need to be clear on what that value proposition is, what the perception is, and where the gap is for you in the price versus the value proposition. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that your promo, your messaging is all focused on the process and you don't actually talk about the promise or the outcome. And particularly for heart-centered entrepreneurs, particularly for women, we don't ever want to promise something we can't deliver on. We don't ever want to say, yeah, you're definitely going to make $10,000 from doing this when we don't have concrete evidence that that's actually going to happen for 100% of the people who do our program. But that doesn't mean we have to be so process orientated. We can still speak to outcomes without making guarantees of certain dollar amounts, of certain results, or of certain outcomes, but we can still talk to outcomes. So for example, I don't promise that if anyone who does my takeoff program will have an $8,000 month. But I know for my ideal clients, their goal when they join the takeoff program is generally to get to that consistent 5 to 8K months. I know that that's what they're looking for. And if someone does the takeoff program and engages and works with me, it's a group mentoring program, it's not a self-study program. So if they jump into the program, they go through the process, they keep me updated, they jump on the calls, is it likely that I can get them to the point where they're going to make 5 to 8K? If they keep showing up and they keep tweaking and changing and we work together on it, is it likely that they're going to get to that consistent 5 to 8K a month? Yes, it is. Do I have a huge percentage of my students who have already achieved that and moved on with their lives? Yes, I do. And so when I talk about the takeoff program, I don't say, I'll guarantee you that you'll get to 5 to 8K months, but I say the type of goal that people who join takeoff are looking to achieve is that consistent 5 to 8K months. So you can see I haven't said, I promise you'll get it, but that's a reasonable goal to set. When you join the takeoff program, it's reasonable to set the goal of getting to 5 to 8K months consistently. Follow the process, go do the modules, keep me informed. It's not going to magically do it just when you buy it. Of course, you've got to do the modules. You've got to put the practices into place. You've got to try some things and see what works and what doesn't, for sure. But one of the promises that I do give is if you keep showing up for your business, so will I. You don't get booted out after 16 weeks and too bad if you didn't make it. So you can talk about the outcome and you can talk about the promise without making promises. There's a big difference between the promise versus making a promise, if that makes sense. So I like to talk about it in terms of outcomes and benefits and, you know, the value proposition, right? What is life going to be like afterwards when you have completed this process? So not just focusing on process, you get to do this and then we do this and then we do this and then we do this, because all you're doing is telling people what the jobs are that they have to do, what the workload is, and you're not focusing people on thinking about, well, when I do that workload, what's that going to create? What's the outcome going to be? How is my life going to be different? That's what we want to make sure that we're also focused on with your messaging, having a balance between process and outcomes. Number 5 launch mistake is overcomplicating your launches. And I think this comes mostly from the conflicting advice that's out there. This constant stream and bombardment of things you must do to get results in your launches. If you're not doing TikToks, you're leaving money on the table. If you're not doing challenges, you're leaving money on the table. If you're not this, you're leaving money. Like, that table is covered in money, I know, but sometimes it's not worth the effort to get that extra little $5 off the table. So rather than creating a large, unwieldy, and complex launch strategies, I actually recommend that you simplify it as much as possible. 20% of what you do in a launch gets you 80% of your results. So your job is to find out, well, what is that 20% and eliminate the other. Just do the 20% that gets you 80% of the results. Keep your launches streamlined and simplified and stop burning yourself out trying to do every single thing that you could possibly do to get that launch working. And instead, remind yourself of why you started this business in the first place. It was not to work 80-hour weeks, I guarantee you. And be tenacious in finding the launch strategy that works most effectively for you without having to make it complex and unwieldy and require that you're online for 12 hours a day every day for 6 weeks, and then you have to take a holiday after you finish your launch because you completely burnt yourself out. One of the things that I talk about a lot is creating a leisurely launch or a lazy launch, and creating a launch that you don't need to take a holiday from. When I'm in launch, my life is no different to when I'm not in launch. It's no different. I work the same number of hours. I do roughly the same activities. It's just that it's focused on a different outcome. It's focused on a different endpoint. That's it. I don't work more hours when I'm launching. I don't do anything different when I'm launching. I show up online, I make videos, I create content, I look after my team. Like, it's all the same. And, I think that's making a launch feel like it's part of business as usual and making your business as usual as streamlined and leisurely as possible. Like, I think that's a fun goal to set. And rather than finding all the new and complicated ways that you could add more complexity to your launch, just look for the ways that you can simplify it down instead. Number 6, this is the final launch mistake that I wanted to cover in today's podcast episode, is the disappearing act. Oh, such a good one. Now, there is a little chart that I like to share, but I understand that most people are going to be listening to this podcast on audio only. So rather than try and explain it on a podcast episode, I'm just going to let you know that my reach to energy chart when it comes to launching is covered in my launch basics training. So I'll make sure I put the link to that over with the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/343. So I have a launch basics training. It's totally free. And in that, I take you through a simplified structure of launching, the core elements of launching that need to be covered. And I talk about this disappearing act and the reach energy chart. So make sure that you go and grab that at tashcorbin.com/343. But in essence, one of the biggest problems that I see, particularly for heart-centered entrepreneurs, particularly for women when they're launching, is that if the launch doesn't look like it's going magnificently every single day, they disappear, the disappearing act. So in the early stages of a launch, it takes a while for the launch to get momentum. And it's also the time when you're the most excited about your launch, right? You've just started it, and so you've got all its energy. And what happens is, in the early stages of your launch, you tend to show up the most. You're also talking generally about a free lead magnet in the early stages of your launch. So it's far easier to talk about. You just want to give value. You want people to come to this free thing. You're promoting a free event, a challenge, a webinar or something. And so there's a lot of energy for it. It's early in your launch. You talk about it lots. It's easier to share something that's free. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. What happens though is that you do that free thing in a lot of cases, or even before the free thing, the sign-ups to the free things start to dwindle off and start to slow down. So you start thinking, oh, well, I've told everyone about it 1,000 times, so that's just it. I've done as much as I can. There's no one else is going to sign up. So the 6 days before your webinar or your challenge, which are the most important 6 days of promoting that free lead magnet, by the way, you stop promoting it because you feel like you've spoken about it too much. Everyone's already heard about it. Your signups are starting to dry up, so why bother? So you disappear before you even get to your first lead magnet. Then you run your first lead magnet, you get a couple of sales straight out of the gate. Woo! Exciting. That's always a fun thing to experience. And then it goes a little bit quiet. And that quietness creates a little mindset spiral of, oh, well, 2 sales, that's all I'm going to make. Oh, well, no one wants to buy from me. But you actually haven't promoted the product beyond talking about it on your lead magnet. You haven't actually shown up with as much vim and vigor and excitement talking about your paid offer as you did your freebie. So this is what I call the disappearing act. When you finally get to the crunch time of making the sale, you disappear. We don't see you as much. We don't hear from you as much. At the very time when your presence is starting to peak, your reach is peaking, you've got the biggest audience leaning in to hear about it, you've disappeared. And there are 2 peaks in sales whenever you have a lead magnet or a launch. The first peak is when you first present the offer, right? So on the webinar or on the challenge or wherever it might be, and then you say, yeah, here, then you first pitch your offer. Your early adopters will jump straight in, right? Your in Sacred Money Archetypes, that'll be your romantics, sometimes your mavericks, your alchemists, your connectors, if it's a connection group program. They're the ones who jump in straight away. Boom, they're in. Yep, I'm in. Then it dwindles a little bit. But you also have your last minute peeps. That's sometimes me. But it can also tend to be like your accumulators. They've got to think about it, add up the ROI, that kind of thing. You might have your romantics and celebrities who are like, oh yeah, I'll get to it. Oh yeah, I'll get to it. And then they just do it at the last minute, right? So there's generally a peak in sales at the very end if you've been consistent. And so something that I had someone witnessed happening in a Facebook group a few weeks ago was someone came into in a course group that I'm in. It's not necessarily about launching, but there was someone talking about their launch, and they said, I ran my webinar and I had 3 people sign up and I was so excited. And then I promoted it for a few days and I just got crickets. No one's responding. No one's replying to my emails. No one's engaging with my posts on socials. And so I feel like everything's done. And my cart doesn't close for another 10 days. And everyone jumped in and said, oh, most people join in the last 48 hours. Most people, don't worry about it. Most people join in the last 48 hours. So of course, this person goes, oh, well, I don't need to do anything till the last 48 hours. But that's not true. It's not that you don't need to do anything for the last 48 hours until the last 48 hours. It's that the action that you take in the 10 days between will drive a spike in sales in that last 48 hours. If you only show up and run your webinar and then only show up and say last day to buy, you're not maximizing that number of people who will buy at that last minute. And in fact, the surge that you were expecting in the last 48 hours may never actually materialize, because that last minute surge relies on you consistently showing up. Now, I'm not saying being there for 12 hours a day and constantly being everywhere, but it needs to be consistent. We need to hear from you consistently during the sales part, to the same extent that we heard from you consistently when you were promoting the free event. So disappearing act is definitely a big one that I see happen quite a lot. And it generally happens because the launch results initially weren't what you were expecting, or some mindset blocks come up, or you might hit an upper limit, or a bit of self-sabotage. But just understanding that reach energy chart that's in the Launch Basics training and being able to see, like, it's better if I'm just consistent throughout, makes a significant difference to your launch results. So make sure you come and grab the link over at tashcorbin.com/343. That's today's show notes. Grab the link to the Launch Basics training out of the show notes from today, and you will see this in a bit more depth and with the diagram that shows the reach energy chart, so you know what I'm talking about. All right, that's it for today's episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions about launching, creating group programs, those sorts of things, I am going to be doing another big batch of podcast recordings shortly. And I am about to go into launch of my Leverage and Launch program. So any questions that you ask will help me to, number one, know how I can support you further. But it's also great content for my launches and free podcast episodes and trainings and all of those sorts of things. So I'll put this link in the show notes as well. But if you go to tashcorbin.com/question and pop your question in there, pop your social media links and all of that kind of stuff, I will give you a shout out and link back to you when I answer that question on the podcast. So tashcorbin.com/343 is the show notes for today's episode. And there you'll find the link to go and put your question in if you don't remember. But I really love getting your questions. And it is a great opportunity for me to give you a bit more reach, give you a little shout out, share the word about who you are and what your business is about to my podcast audience, which is in the several thousands. So it's a very good opportunity for you to borrow from my audience and get in front of them by giving me some inspiration and ideas on how I'd be able to help you with answering questions in the podcast episode. So it's a win-win little situation we've got for ourselves there. Make sure you come and check it all out there. If you have any questions, get in touch. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.